1588. The Spanish Armada, the most powerful naval fleet ever assembled, sets sail to crush England once and for all. Spain rules the seas. Spain rules the Americas. England is a secondary power, a footnote. The Armada is destroyed, not by British cannons, but by a storm, pure luck. And from that moment, Britain begins its slow, improbable climb to controlling a quarter of the entire planet. Canada, India, Australia, Nigeria, Hong Kong, Egypt. 1 in 4 human beings on Earth living under one crown. No empire in history ever came close. But here's the part nobody talks about. It didn't last. Not because of a single war, not because of one catastrophic defeat. It unraveled, slowly, almost quietly, like an empire that forgot why it existed. So the real question isn't how Britain conquered the world. The real question is, how did it lose it? It didn't start with an army. It started with a piece of paper. 1600. Queen Elizabeth I signs a royal charter for a private trading company, the East India Company. Not soldiers, not generals, merchants. Their job was simple: find spices, find silk, find profit. But wherever trade went, problems followed. And wherever problems followed, guns followed. Within decades, the company wasn't just trading, it was negotiating with kings, building forts, raising its own army, governing millions of people on behalf of shareholders in London. Then came 1757, a small river, a Bengali summer, a battle called Plassey. The East India Company's army, outnumbered, exhausted, defeats the Nawab of Bengal and takes control of the richest province in Asia. London looks at what just happened, and instead of stopping it, they decide to keep it. That's the moment Britain stops being a trading nation and starts becoming an empire. Because the logic was simple: control one territory and you need to control the territory next to it. To protect your border, you need a bigger border. It never stops. It can't stop. Empires don't grow by plan. They grow by momentum. By 1800, Britain has footholds on every major coastline on Earth, not by grand design, just by following the money and letting the empire build itself around them. By the 19th century, Britain wasn't just an empire, it was a system, a machine that ran on coal, steel, and sea power. And it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Royal Navy patrolled every ocean. At its peak, the British fleet was larger than the next 2 navies combined. Control the seas, you control global trade. Control global trade, you control the world. It was that simple. And for over a century, it worked. The Industrial Revolution gave Britain something no rival had yet: factories that could produce weapons, ships, and goods faster than anyone else on Earth. While India was still weaving cloth by hand, Britain was running mechanical looms at scale. The technological gap wasn't just military, it was total, and they used it. In 1884, European powers gathered in Berlin to divide Africa among themselves. No African leader was invited, no African voice was heard. In a single conference, an entire continent was carved up like a map on a table. Britain walked away with the largest share. At its absolute peak, 1920, the British Empire covered 13.7 million square miles. 1 in 4 people on Earth was a British subject. The sun, quite literally, never set on it. There was always a piece of British territory in daylight, somewhere on the globe. But the bigger the machine, the harder it is to keep it running. The first signs didn't come from outside, they came from within, and they came earlier than most people think. 1776. The American colonies declare independence. For the first time, a piece of the British Empire looks London in the eye and says, no, Britain fights, Britain loses. And, for the first time, the Empire learns a lesson it will spend the next 2 centuries ignoring. You cannot hold people forever against their will. But the real earthquake came in the 20th century. 2 world wars, back to back, fought largely with British soldiers, British money, and British resources. By 1945, Britain had won the war and bankrupted itself doing it. The treasury was empty, the debt was crushing, and the empire, which had always been held together by the idea of British strength, was now visibly exhausted. The colonies noticed. India noticed most of all. For decades, Mahatma Gandhi had been building something the British had no military answer for, a mass movement of peaceful resistance. You cannot shoot an idea. You cannot imprison an entire population. And by 1947, Britain simply had no energy left to try. India was granted independence. Pakistan was born the same day. The largest piece of the empire was gone. What followed was a domino effect. Ghana, 1957, Nigeria, 1960, Kenya, 1963. One by one, the map of the empire started losing its red. Not through revolution in most cases, but through negotiation, exhaustion, and the slow realization in London that the cost of holding on was greater than the benefit. The machine was still standing, but it was running on empty. There's a moment that historians often point to as the true end of the British Empire, not a battle, not a treaty, a humiliation. 1956. Egypt's president Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalizes the Suez Canal, a waterway Britain had controlled for decades. Britain, furious, launches a military operation to take it back. For a brief moment, it looks like the old empire flexing its muscle one last time. Then the United States picks up the phone. President Eisenhower tells London to stop immediately or face devastating financial consequences. Britain stops within days, without argument. That was the moment the world understood. Britain was no longer the power that made the decisions. It was now a power that received them. The empire wasn't just shrinking, it was being replaced by something new. American hegemony. A different kind of global control, one without colonies, but with bases, dollars, and influence everywhere. Through the 1960s and 70s, the withdrawal continued. Africa, the Caribbean, Southeast Asia. Each independence ceremony was framed in London as a generous gift, the natural conclusion of Britain's civilizing mission. In reality, it was a managed retreat, an attempt to lose gracefully what could no longer be held by force. By 1997, Hong Kong, the last major crown jewel, was handed back to China. A ceremony, fireworks, a flag coming down, and with it, the last symbolic chapter of an empire that had once covered a quarter of the earth quietly closed. It didn't end with a bang, it ended with a handshake and a long flight home. So what do we do with all of this? What does the rise and fall of the British Empire actually tell us? It tells us that power is never permanent. Every system that has ever called itself unshakable eventually shakes. Rome fell, the Mongols faded, the Ottomans collapsed, and Britain, the most geographically sprawling empire in human history, quietly packed its bags and went home. But here's what makes the British case different. The empire didn't just disappear, it left fingerprints everywhere. The borders of modern Africa, drawn by strangers in Berlin, still cause conflicts today. The partition of India and Pakistan, rushed and brutal, still echoes in every crisis between those two nations. The political systems, languages and legal codes that Britain installed across the world are still running, long after the empire that built them is gone. That's the strange legacy of colonialism. The physical empire ends, but the consequences don't have a withdrawal date, and Britain itself? It spent decades quietly negotiating its new identity. No longer the center of the world, no longer the power that sets the rules. Just a mid-sized island in the North Atlantic, with an extraordinary history, a complicated conscience, and a monarchy that still tours the Commonwealth like a reminder of something vast that once existed. The sun finally set on the British Empire. It just took about 200 years to do it, and when it did, the world it left behind was permanently, irreversibly changed, for better and for worse, depending entirely on where you were standing when the flag came down.